everyone, and welcome to Super Respectable. My name is David Lewis, and this is Tosh Rahman. Hi, Tosh.
What?
No, I'm just joking. We're joking. We're joking. I'm Tosh Rahman. That's David Lewis. How are you, Dave?
I'm good, Toshio. How are you?
I'm good, David. How's it going? It's been a week since we did our last episode. I've been thinking about art heists all week. Actually, after that episode, I've been thinking about movies that have art heists, books that I could find, real art heists, planning art heists. But that was a good episode. That was fun.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. And I'm thinking I probably should have done a bit more up-to-date research on the subsequent events because I think they've identified the remains of a few of the pieces of art. So,
Uh
and there's some information on the sentences of these people, but that can all be added as a hyperlink to the episode
Sure,
page.
sure.
It's all in the past now.
No problem. We can add it as a hyperlink. We could even update on our social medias too. That's actually interesting. Some of the topics we've done, we should. I'm sure if there are ever any updates, we should definitely do our due diligence as investigative reporters and post them
Absolutely.
properly. How's the situation in the Netherlands on day 7,420?
7,000 captain's log. It's getting pretty bad here with coronavirus. It's about 4,500 cases per day now.
Yeah.
And as I was saying to you earlier, the mask wearing is becoming a thing.
Cool.
It was one of the few holdouts, Netherlands and Sweden, not really doing so much on that front. But lately the government has turned around and said you should be wearing masks when you go indoors. And actually people seem to be starting to follow the advice. So we'll see if that has an effect.
What do you think, just in your opinion, of course, you're not on trial here or anything like that. What
That's
do you
good to know.
What do you, globally around the world, or even specifically in the Netherlands, you choose whichever option is you want to answer through. Why do you think people don't wear masks? Is it they don't believe it'll help them, or it's their right not to wear a mask, or a combination of both, or option C? Like for me, when you talk about keeping distance, sanitize, washing your hands, and wearing masks, it just clicks for me, and it's not even something I double think. Right? I will wear the mask because we have 3 holes on our face through which things enter, and we're covering the holes so nothing enters. But I don't understand why people are so adamant against it.
I guess there's like the political side. People don't like being told what to do by the government, and there's that element. So there's the element of freedom, and I want to do whatever I want.
My
But
rights.
that logic doesn't really apply when there's a health epidemic.
Yeah.
It's not like they're telling everyone to wear like blue socks or something like that.
Yeah.
It's it's a pretty basic health thing, like you said. But then, being in the Netherlands where there was no official advice to wear a mask for the longest time, I started out wearing a mask in March and April for a couple trips to the shops. Then I just stopped, and I felt like, why bother? No one else is doing it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm being judged for doing it, then I just sort of fell into line with what everyone else was doing, which, it's, right or wrong. That's what happened. But now that people are wearing it, I'm making it a habit. After my trip to Italy, where I saw everyone was wearing it, I just thought, this is no big deal. Just make it a habit. When you leave the house, you bring your wallet, your phone, your keys, and a mask.
Yeah.
It's just a habit you got to do now.
Yeah.
But then now with the situation here, when I go grocery shopping or into a small shop, I do start judging the handful of people who aren't wearing masks. I'm trying to think, like, what are they thinking? Do they think that they're sort of invincible or have their own force field to the virus? Like, what's going through their head? Are they trying to prove a point that they're better or whatever it is? I don't say anything. I'm just judging silently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think you're right, because wherever I've kind of seen the non-mask movement has been more in line with countries that are very much pro individual rights and freedoms, right? So like we discussed this with Marcus, and I think in our very first episode, where countries where, of course, rights and freedoms exist, but they're not as prevalently discussed. People are very quick to wear masks because they are told to do so, and they don't question it. Whereas in other parts of the world, people are debating against it just because they have the right to fight it. Like, and even if it doesn't make any sense. I think the last one I saw was in Montreal. They were having a big demonstration or about these people who are, I mean, in the States, of course, but in Canada, our home country, there was people who just they didn't want to wear masks because they had the right not to wear a mask, which I just thought was a silly reason not to wear a mask. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess people will be looking back at this time not only in a public health sense, but I'm sure in terms of civil rights, in terms of what could be done in the future, whether martial law or some type of legality could be implemented in the name of public health. But the anti-mask movement, I just is really silly at this point. I think it's just an additional thing. Like you said, when I go out, it's wallet, keys, phone, mask, right? Wallet, keys, phone, mask, and
Yeah, everyone does that. Well, I certainly do this pat down before I leave the house or after
yeah,
I leave the house. Do I have this? It's a bit of the Macarena, just checking everything.
yeah.
And it's added to the mask, check the face
Check the face.
without touching the face.
Yes, that's very
Yeah,
true.
it's interesting. I saw something online this week about, I think it was in Thailand,
Yeah.
where they have a scanner. It scans your face to see
cool.
whether you're wearing a face covering. And
Oh, you mean
I
like
think it's a pretty cool innovation because
like on the street?
so if you're about to enter a grocery store,
Oh, okay, yeah.
so at the entrance, there's like a scanner. I don't know how effective it is, but it looked like it worked pretty well because it could figure out whether you were covering your mouth and nose.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, it wouldn't let you in.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that's a really cool thing because the poor shopkeepers around the world are getting a lot of verbal abuse from just having to tell certain customers to kindly put on a mask. And, I really feel bad for a lot of them, they're being put at risk by this group of people who want to record stuff for social media and, make a point. And then they're just, fight the power kind of thing.
But the cool thing with masks, if by the way, I think most people wear kind of standardized medical, the white or the blue ones with like the things. But yeah, have you ever seen any of the customized ones? People have really unique ones, and you see it, whether it's like their famous, like their city name or the sports team they support or anything cool. So, I mean, if that's going to make people wear masks, I'm all for it. If you want to style it and make it more personalized, that's totally cool.
Yeah, why not?
It's for public health, and like we've been buying these boxes of 50 masks, and we just use them 2-3 times each, and we check them out, kind of the thing. So we just finished our second box, which is kind of scary, So like we started a few months back, so I got to go buy more boxes, and then we're still on our second. I bought this like liter of sanitizer, so like that's for our hands, and then like if we buy anything or we come home or we've touched our phone or groceries, we still do the groceries. So like, but we've calmed down a little bit. We don't do like vegetables and stuff now, or we do. I mean,
you don't bleach the vegetables.
We never bleach the vegetables. That's dangerous. We used to give it a little bit of a more in depth of a cleaning, but now we just put them away. But before we use them, we take them out of the fridge for the meal. We just give them a good rinse with water, and then we kind of take it from there. But I don't know, guys. We'll be back with Captain's Log 2431 next week, but hopefully.
I hope so.
Anyways, I'm presenting, and it's very much related to this issue. So I know we are apolitical in our podcast. We are political in our non-podcast lives, but I will be apolitical. But something has happened in the last week, which has never happened before. A sitting president has become sick with coronavirus with less than a month before the election is to take place. And this has spurred a number of questions. So in today's topic, my question is, what happens if President Trump dies? And I'm going to answer this in 3 sections. One is, what if he dies in office as president, which is a little bit more straightforward. Mm-hmm. What happens if he dies after winning the election on November the 3rd? And again, we're apolitical, so we're neither for or against it. So he dies after winning the election, but before taking office, right? On June the 20th, January the 20th, I'm sorry. And the situation is, what happens if he dies before the election as a presidential candidate, not as president, right? Okay. So as we go through it, it's actually quite unique and quite complicated as the levels progress. And we're going into uncharted territories in certain areas here that not even presidential experts can really narrow down the answer. So a lot of this is very firm, and a lot of this is very open-minded. And I don't want this to be a complete presentation. We should have a discussion after each point.
Have you been reviewing your American constitutional law?
Yes, as a as a Canuck, as a Canadian, I've been reviewing my American law history. I've been reading through the Constitution, understanding it to the best of my ability. Like you, I'm a history buff. I like it, and American history is definitely of something of interest for me. I don't have the Constitution memorized, nor do I know the different aspects of American law, but I'm always fascinated, and I'm always trying to learn. And U.S. presidential history is always interesting because I'll talk about the Electoral College versus the popular vote, which is kind of relevant.
Oh man, so complicated.
It's I've watched 2 videos about it today just as a refresher, and still I'm like, what? So I'm very thankful to be a Canadian because we have a much easier election system, and it's much more straightforward. But in the States, they really have just jumbled it. And then if you add what's happening now, it's just a hot mess. So let me try my best. Okay.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you so much. So, as any president who's a sitting president, if anything happens to them in which they are not able to fulfill the roles of being president, there is a line of succession, meaning they can be taken off as president and someone else can be put on, whether it's temporarily or permanently, but more so the former. So this is due to the Presidential Succession Act of 1947, which says that if a president dies while in office, is removed, which I'll talk about, is sick, so they can't perform their duties, or is impeached, as in Nixon, for example, as in Nixon, there is a line of succession. So this is interesting. There are actually...
Is this a 25th Amendment, or...?
Good for you. Congratulations. And we're Canadians, people. We're not even Americans.
It's tough.
So after the president, the second in command would be the vice president. At the current situation, it would be Mike Pence. Again, apolitical. Second in line would be the Speaker of the House. Interestingly enough, in the current situation, it's Nancy Pelosi, who is a Democrat. So they are not a Republican. It's of the different party. And she's actually older than Trump. She's in her 80s. She's 80 years old, and Trump's 74.
She's 80?
Yeah, she's 80, I believe. We can cross-reference that again. So she's number 2. After that, it's the president pro tempore, which is the longest given senator in the Senate. So it's based on age at that point. It would have been the majority leader of not of the Senate, but of the House. But they've actually changed it, so it's the longest given senator. So that's number 3. It's some old guy. I forgot his name. Again, we're Canadian, so it's fine.
And he's like 89, 90 something.
Yeah. He's old, man. But what happens is, so you have 1, 2, 3. So 1 is part of the president's cabinet, his vice president. Then you have the Speaker of the House, who is not part of the cabinet, and in this situation of another party. Then you have the president pro tempore, who could be part of the same party or not, depending on who he is. In this situation, he is a Republican. But then you move to the cabinet. So in the U.S., there are 14 people in the cabinet. Some of them have more important roles, and some of them have less important roles. And it's actually the order of the line of succession is based on when that department was established. So whoever is the longest sitting senator. So in America, the Secretary of State is number 4 in line of the succession. Then it's the Secretary of the Treasury, then Defense, then the Attorney General, and then the minor 10 are not as important. Like I can't even name HUD. There's House and Urban Development. That's all I can think of. Education, transportation.
But things would have to go horribly wrong to reach any of these levels.
Totally. Like if your Secretary of Housing and Urban Development became president, literally 13 people before him was not able to take the place of it, you know? So, and it's interesting. There's an entire TV show about this. It's called Designated Survivor. I don't know if you've seen it.
No way. I've heard of it. I didn't know it was about this.
It's with Kiefer Sutherland, and he is actually Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And the entire 13 people ahead of him get killed because they're all there for they're all in the Senate for some type of event. But what happens is, due to security protocols, they've removed one person from the line of succession and kept him over. See? And so the entire Senate blows up, and he takes over, and he has no idea what he's doing. And I stopped watching after episode 10. So then it's been 4 seasons afterwards. So there is a line of succession, which I just want to say. So if the president is sitting and anything happens to him, there are literally 14, a minimum of 17 people afterwards who could take on the place. Interestingly, during Trump's administration, the cabinet has changed so many times that these people have rotated. So for example, Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State. No longer he is. Jim Mattis, sorry, was the Secretary of Defense, but he got removed, right? Then Sessions was the Attorney General. So during Trump's time, the line of succession has not been as fluid as it would have been minus COVID, right? Even before COVID, just because of the
Hmm.
number of changes. So there have been a total of 8 times in American history where a president was not able to fulfill his duties, and so the line of succession came on. So I'll go from the most recent to the least, but not all 8. I'll give you 3 because once we get past 3, some of the presidents are not as common, and even I didn't really know what was happening, right? So in '81, Ronald Reagan was actually shot in front of a hotel in Washington D.C. And so he was still able to fulfill his roles as president, but he could have allowed it would have the rules would have allowed the president to transfer power in this situation to the vice president if he was incapacitated. He actually didn't he didn't put this into practice, but a few years later, when Reagan underwent a surgery, he did implement it, and he got George H.W. Bush, his VP, to be acting president for like those few hours.
Wow.
So George W. Before he became president, he had a little taste of it. In '72, Nixon, when he resigned due to Watergate, this is really interesting actually. His VP at the time, Vice President Spire, he was actually under allegations of corruption from a different
Really?
different thing. So Nixon understood that if he resigned, and because of the political situation his VP was going to, that it might not go to him, but it might have to go to the third person because he would have to leave. It would have been a Democrat, so they would have lost power. So what they did was they got the VP to resign, right? They replaced him with Gerald Ford. Then Nixon resigned. Ford took over. Ford became president and gave Nixon a presidential pardon.
Genius.
Genius, right? Very interesting. So they pretty much used the 25th Amendment against against the U.S. The country and the people for their own benefit. It was very manipulative and very for their own self-interest. In '67, JFK was assassinated, right, when he was in Texas, and so an hour and 38 minutes after he was assassinated, Lyndon B. Johnson, his VP, took over. And then while he was president, there was actually no vice president in office for a year. So nobody replaced him. Yeah. So
I didn't know.
If anything had happened to Johnson, it would have gone to number 3, right? Then, if you look at it that way. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, during in the cabinet of JFK, number 7 in the line of succession was Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, and also JFK's little brother. So that was the first time there were 2 blood relatives in the same line of succession. So interesting enough, but pretty much the summary of this section is that there is a continuity of government. There is a system put in place as per the 25th Amendment, as you've said, and they test it from time to time, and they even have protocols in place. And there are even, it's interesting, I read, there are even NGOs and think tanks who work to find weaknesses in the line of succession in the system of it, and they give recommendations on how they can update it, including people's age, including the fact that most of the cabinet live in Washington D.C. So in case of a nuclear or chemical or biological attack, it would wipe everyone out. So there are recommendations and there are workings, which is quite interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly, either for the 25th Amendment, either a president can give the next in line the power while he's incapacitated, maybe due to a surgery or due to unconsciousness, or if the majority of the cabinet decides so, if they feel the president is incapacitated to take a decision, they can actually take power away from him and give it to the next person in line, which has never happened based on my knowledge. But both do exist. So it actually happened in Air Force One with Harrison Ford. If you do remember that movie when they hijacked Air Force One.
Vaguely.
The cabinet couldn't get in. They didn't know if Harrison Ford was still alive or not, so then they wanted to vote to give power to the VP, but the VP was like, no, I believe in my president. And then Harrison Ford came out and kicked ass, and then he was okay, and then he flew the plane and everything. So it does happen.
There was also a movie, Vice. Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen it. Is it good?
Christian Bale.
Yeah.
It got really bad reviews or mediocre reviews.
Yeah.
I watched it 2 or 3 times. I loved it.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a big focus on September 11th. And one of the things was basically how Cheney took control.
Yeah.
during that time.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the specifics, whether they cited, 25th Amendment or anything like that. But he really like bunkered down and had like this whole cabinet under control. And he said that
Yeah.
everything comes under my purview right now,
Yeah.
which I found was quite
That's crazy.
interesting.
Our listeners, let's watch Vice. We'll talk about it next week. I'll watch it
Great
today.
movie.
I'll watch. Excuse me. Okay, so that one is a certainty. We know what's going to happen if anything happens to Trump while he was president. But now we have a problem. Now we get into sticky waters. It has to do because of time. Okay, so we are today is October the 5th. The election is November the 3rd. So we're less than a month away. So what happens is, as long as you have time, you can fix things. But with things less than a month away, it becomes an issue. So I'll go over the second least likely scenario, the second least sticky scenario. My apologies.
Okay.
What would happen if Trump won the election on November the 3rd, but died before being re-inaugurated on January the 20th? So you have literally about 10 weeks between that period, right? So what would happen most likely is that the Electoral College of each state, which we'll talk about, would most likely vote for a new president, right? So could you explain the Electoral College? Do you think so? Because I would have a little difficult situation for it. But because I've heard you talk about it before, if you can explain it, I'll add on to it a little bit.
I would struggle, but as I understand that for each state, there's a certain amount of electors.
Yes.
And when you vote for the president, you're basically giving a signal to the elector to then nominate the president. And each state has a different amount of electors. So that's why it's important to win certain states because of the amount of votes available, blah, blah, blah.
That's exactly. That's how I've understood.
And the electors are like party bigwigs, as far as I know. They're like, I don't know who exactly they are, but they're people.
Yeah.
They're human beings for now.
Yeah.
That act on behalf of the will of the people, I guess.
Yeah. So the way I read it was that, that we're having this election on November the 3rd. People are not actually voting for the president per se. What they're voting for is their electors. And then their electors on December, the blah, 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 will be pretty much passing on that vote on a more national level. So there are 538 electors across America, and it's based on state and it's based on population of states. So like you've said, places like California, Texas, New York, Massachusetts have more electors because of more population. And every 10 years, they have a census. And based on the census, they either add on to the number of electors or reduce based on population movement. There are a total of 538, and that's because there are 100 senators, 435 members of House of Representative.
Members of Congress?
Members of Congress, sorry. And 3 from the state of, from the District of Columbia who are electors. Because the District of Columbia, very interesting, I learned, is neither a state nor a province nor anything else. It's supposed to be an independent region. So for a very long time, they actually didn't have any power to vote in the federal elections, but only in the 60s were they given the same voting rights as the rest of the country. And apparently the 4 territories of America, Puerto Rico, the British Virgin Islands, Guam, and I'm missing a number, Panama? No. No,
not yet.
Not yet. So apparently there are over 4.4 million Americans who are citizens of these countries, of this country. They are ineligible to vote either. So like you said, so the Electoral College is a group of people who no one's ever met before. And they pretty much pass on the will of the citizenry. And so they, if it's a winner-take-all system, right? So if in California, the state votes for, let's say, Barack Obama, then the electoral is obligated morally to go forward with the idea that, yes, California has voted for them, I'll vote for them too. But legally, they are not. I learned this today, by the way. If they feel that this is not like in their own interests, they have the right legally not to pass forward the votes of the people, which sounds completely absurd, right? So the big problem in America is electoral votes versus popular votes, right? So that when you go to our American listeners, when you go to a polling station and you vote for Barack Obama, let's say, for example, that one vote for Barack Obama is a popular vote, right? but that same vote goes towards the electoral vote, electoral college. And so if that state ends up voting for Barack Obama, then Barack Obama also gets the electoral vote as well as the popular vote. But
Mm-hmm.
if your electoral committee member ends up going for Mitt Romney or whoever his kind of opponent was, I'm trying to remember who is Romney, right? Like 8 years ago, I forget. Then it
Yeah.
then there's a difference in popular vote versus electoral vote, which is what happened in 2000, right? You remember Al Gore versus George W. Bush? Al Gore won the popular vote but lost the electoral vote, whereas George W. Bush lost the popular vote and won the electoral vote because pretty much of states, right? So he could have
Same thing, 2016 with Clinton getting more.
Clinton getting more. So it's a very interesting system where you could theoretically, if you're a mathematician or a statistician, you could really, I mean, they do this already. You could pretty much just focus all your energies on certain states. They say that, the reason they do this is so that, even little states have swing votes. And it's true. If you look historically, little ones could predict the outcome. But if you captured a Texas or a California or a New York or an Oregon, you would have a huge weight off your shoulder. You know what I mean? In the sense that you wouldn't have to do like one California is equal to like 10 mini states, in terms of electoral votes. But again, it's just my knowledge.
But the crazy thing is, as far as I'm aware, California has almost always been Democrat. So
Yeah.
the candidate won't spend much time there because they take it for granted that they've
Yeah.
got it, and so they push into Pennsylvania or
Yeah. They go to swing
Florida,
states. Yeah.
the swing states.
Swing states. I'll post a couple of videos I saw online onto our page for listeners to learn about it. Again, okay. So going back to my topic. So say on the 3rd he won and he died somehow before inauguration. Theoretically, he would have there would be still time, right? So because of this excess of time, what would happen? One historian has suggested that the electoral college of each state would then re-vote for a new president based on the party. Most state electors in this situation, if Trump were to win but to die, would probably vote for the VP because that's the most logical step. So they say that Pence would come on. But there's an argument been made because some states, it's the law that says that you have to. So if that's the case, Trump's name was on the ballot, but he passed. So you could no longer you pass it on to Mike Pence because you'd have to vote for someone on a ballot. You couldn't just transfer it over, which is what one of the arguments was. In this situation, you could go to court and it could be a huge legal debate for a while. The 20th Amendment has been also brought into this issue, and people say that if something happens to the president-elect, the vice president-elect should be president as well. So it's murky water, but it's not completely that you can't see anything. There is some clarity. There's just a difference of opinion. The majority would say that Pence would more than likely become a nominee, and then he'd have to get approved by the state, by the Congress, and then he would become president as well. So it is a little unique. I read somewhere that at the end of the day, whether you go through the normal system of voting where nothing is wrong or this situation, the 12th Amendment of the Constitution of America gives Congress the final say on who is elected president and vice president, right? So Congress can accept what the state of electors has from the Electoral College has put forward, or they can decline it. The theory is that they'll accept it because it's the will of the people. But in the situation where Trump would die after the election, and there's a lot of kind of not knowing, the House and the Senate could disagree on what's happening, and then that would become an issue in itself. But more than likely, what will happen is that in a situation, if Trump dies post-election but pre-inauguration, through a number of processes, the vice president is more than likely to take over in that situation, and he would choose a new vice president to be his VP. So it's unique. It's never happened. Though I did read in history that a month after taking office, one president did die 31 days after taking office.
It was FDR, wasn't it? It was FDR, wasn't it?
Not FDR. It was it was about a little earlier than FDR. FDR, something happened to FDR as well, but he died a little later into his presidency, I believe. In my scenario, his VP took over, and his VP took over. It was all really controversial. His VP took over, and he didn't even say that we needed another election or whatnot. He's like, "I'll just become president," and he took power. And people complained. A lot of people in this cabinet thought he wasn't qualified to be president.
In his own cabinet.
In FDR, in his own cabinet, yeah. Do you remember what happened in FDR's situation when he passed? His VP took over, didn't he? Or did they have another? Do you remember who his
Yep,
VP was?
I believe Eisenhower came afterwards, and it was very shortly after. So I think it was less than 2 months after he was
Yeah,
elected, because FDR was a very sick man, and they kind of kept it from. I think the public
yeah,
knew that he was unwell. They don't think they knew how unwell he was.
yeah,
There's a lot of cases in the presidential history where uh, I'm not sure if you've watched the doctor briefings with Trump, where you've seen
yeah,
how the health of the president has been, let's say, misrepresented or
yeah.
massaged for the public's and the confidence of the nation.
Do you think it's for the good of the public so they feel confident, or do you think it's because you don't want to show weakness? And Trump's like a power control freak.
Yeah, I
It,
guess there's definitely an element of Trump's persona where he doesn't want to show any weakness, but
yeah,
like they've clearly done it in the past for other presidents who've had issues, and I guess I mean, back then it was the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and they definitely didn't want to project weakness to their
yeah,
enemies, and they want to show a healthy president somehow.
yeah,
Um, but at a certain point, it's the land of freedom, democracy, and free press and everything. So why can't they just be honest and do things
yeah,
differently and just say what's actually going on? Because
yeah.
everybody knows that there's a bit more to the story than what is being said right now.
Sure. I think also as time progresses and technologies evolve, people are getting smarter. They're getting information quicker. They're more recognizing of what the reality on the ground is. And I think most people uh, clearly understand something is wrong with Trump's health, and that it's a facade. It is really unique to watch, but scary at the same time. So, and this brings us to point number three. So, if I was to use the metaphor of swimming, if Trump was just a president and he got sick and he wasn't able to do anything during his term, uh, we know what's going to happen. It's line of succession. It's like swimming in a nice, clear swimming pool, no waves whatsoever. You see the line, you see the end, you see the bottom, you're good to go. You know that if you start drowning, the lifeguard's going to jump in and save you. If we were going to use the example of what happens to Trump if he dies after winning the election, but before inaugurating, it's like swimming in a pond, kind of. It's a little murky. More than likely, you're not going to die. We're going to figure it out. If Trump dies as a candidate in the next 28 days before the election, it's like swimming in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with a storm and tidal waves all over you. This is the first time in history this would happen. The closest that's ever happened is in 1912. A VP died before an election, but it really didn't matter because he was VP and you can replace them pretty quickly. You're not voting for VP, right? If this was to happen, really it is one of the messiest, most complicated legal aspects of an election in US history. Nobody really knows what would happen. There are a number of theories, but because it's never been tested before, they're just theories. They were saying that if there was time, for example, if we had 6 months before the election, we could easily replace the candidate by having the RNC, the Republican National Committee, vote again for a new candidate, which Trump, because he was the incumbent, there was no voting, but say he wasn't the incumbent, there would have been a vote, right? We would have started
Yeah.
15 years ago for 2020, and there would have been, yeah. So we would have been able to vote for someone, and more than likely it would have been Pence because he is the running mate, and so it would have been that. But the problem now is that with such short amount of time before the election, you can't change Trump's name on the ballot. Ballots have been printed,
Right.
many of which have been sent out. 63 million is one report I've read. Number of ballots have been sent out to voters. 3 million of which have already voted ahead of time and been mailed in.
Mm.
So we're so close to election day that if Trump was to anything was to happen to Trump, you couldn't revoke any of those ballots, nor can you change his name. In addition, the withdrawal date to remove yourself as a candidate has already passed in all states minus two, but the majority of which. And the date of the election has already been set. So it's the first. It's November the 3rd. It's and only Congress can change it, but Congress has never changed the election date. Congress can't even decide on what to eat for lunch. I'm pretty sure they coming together for the date would be impossible. I heard from one professor, he was saying that, quote, it would be impossible to change ballots at this time without delaying the election and starting the voting process over again. Professor Richard Hazen, a law professor from the University of California, Irvine School of Law. I don't think Congress is going to do that. There is a theory that says that if Trump passed before the election, but you had to use the ballots, you could put up another candidate theoretically, but it would be Trump's name on the ballot, but it would actually be the other candidate. So, for example, if Trump passed, Pence would be the official presidential nominee for the Republican Party, but it would be Trump's name, right? But then this comes back to the idea that all these people that pre-voted, they voted for Trump or for Joe Biden. They didn't vote for Pence versus Biden, right? So what happens in this
Mm.
situation? So from what I've read, the most likely scenario is that through a number of different legalities, Pence would most likely take over, whether it be temporarily or permanently as the candidate, but his name wouldn't be on the ballot. But literally, your guess is as good as mine. So this is what I think the most scariest of scenarios is now. We have a president who clearly has COVID. He's been tested for it. He's been positive. It's been 3-4 days. Members of his circle have also tested for it. There is a chance that Joe Biden could have had it and it didn't show. He is an older gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
Both Biden and Trump are in their 70s, I believe. Trump is at higher risk. He's overweight. He's a little chubbers. He's a little chubby. He's a little overweight. He doesn't have the healthiest of diets. And we were talking before we started recording is that he's going on performing this Hollywood show that he's okay with security service and helicopters and this and that. But most people are show symptoms for at least 2 weeks, and he clearly is diagnosed with it. And even the videos I watched today, you can definitely tell something is off. Like he doesn't seem like healthy at all.
Have you seen the clips where he's struggling to breathe? Because there's the like Hollywood thing that he tweeted out, and then the journalists were there filming, and someone released the clip of him kind of really struggling to breathe. Some said he was emotional, but or he's a 70-year-old climbing a bunch of stairs and out of breath. But I think it's kind of troubling.
It's really the thing I was thinking about all day today while prepping for this. The thing that's troubling about it is that we make such a huge deal of the American presidency globally, right? Not only in times of election, but the position they have, the most powerful person in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So we've sort of put ourselves in this hole. And now, in addition to the fact that the last 4 years have been very problematic from a political standpoint, both nationally in the States and internationally, I think there's more attention paid to this election. And so, I'll call a spade while being apolitical. I think the majority of the world is hoping that there can be a shift in administrations to the continuity of politics. And so suddenly when something like this happens, it becomes a real bump in the road because you could literally have a presidential candidate pass on before an election, right? If it were to happen, it would be a huge, huge mess. I don't know. I mean, do you think, for example, they would delay the election? Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't think that would happen. From what I've read and heard, I think it'd be like sacrilege to change that November 3rd date. It's like a sacred time vote on that day. Blah, blah, blah. And I think if there was like a really significant thing that happened, like Trump was incapacitated or died before then they would deal with whatever happens, the consequences of it after the vote. And I don't know, like, is there a mechanism in the U.S. to call another election before the next like mandated election? Does that have to be passed by Congress and all that?
You mean what they do in our country when they just call
any other like normal democracy?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a great question. I'll look it up afterwards. I mean, we're from Canada. I mean, do you remember during our previous prime minister's tenure, there was like 4 elections in like 10 years or something like that, and like he called one every couple of years, or when he was feeling like he wanted one. In the States, I think that 4-year rule is pretty set in stone, right? Whatever you've done. I mean, I'll look it up. I don't know. Again, we're not Americans, so our history is just of interest. Not of.
I think that's like one of the prized elements of American democracy. They pride themselves on their stability of governance. The confidence of knowing that every 4 years there's going to be an election and 2-term maximum presidents. I don't know how long that's been the case, but it's the 2 terms, and then not going to have some guy change the Constitution, that sort of thing. So I don't think that the date will change, but who knows what will happen in the next few days. For me, that's the most interesting thing, is the next week of what's going to happen, because
Yeah.
even his doctors were saying
There's mixed
um,
messages, right?
the,
Like
the the
you have
biggest
different doctors.
risks are like 3 or 4 days from now.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, they had to project this, like we said, image of confidence and optimism about his health, and they got
Yeah.
him out of the hospital. But clearly, I think there's, if you look at what happened to Boris Johnson
Hmm.
in the UK,
Hmm.
he posted a video, I think, like 3 days into his diagnosis, and he didn't look great. He doesn't always look that good, um, but he was looking all right, relatively speaking. But then 3 days after that, he ended up being in the ICU
Yeah.
on a ventilator, and he
Yeah.
said he nearly died. And Boris
Yeah.
Johnson almost has the same health indicators as Trump. He's kind of like
Yeah.
overweight,
But
not the same
younger, right?
age, but
Yeah. Yeah.
younger, but younger.
Yeah.
Um, so I do wonder what will happen in the next week or so.
Well, in addition, to add a unique layer, I think a lot of this is because of the general dislike of Trump and his administration and how they kind of handle it. So I wondered if you replace Trump with a Barack Obama who is running for re-election, if 8 years ago, for example, and something like this were to happen, would it be the same type of media speculation and debate and whatnot, or would it be we hope he gets well soon? Because I know people are saying that about Trump, but there really is like a real hope for change in a month's time, right? From in the states, I think there's a huge, like, the last I checked, Biden has an 8-point lead, and that was a couple of days ago I heard. So like I think this is, but now I think there's a real movement to get Trump out. But I wonder if it's that motivation that's really kind of put a pin on what's happening now, or whatnot. If you know what I'm trying to say, if the candidate was replaced with more likable candidate, would it be different?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, there's clearly like a significant portion of the American population that will support Trump or the Republicans no matter what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Trump said before, I could shoot someone in Times Square or outside of the Trump Towers, and no one would do anything. They'd still come for me. They'd still vote for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite true. And ever since like Brexit and the 2016 election, I've
Yeah.
really been reluctant to just be super confident about like
Yeah.
he's
100%.
going to lose this time or this is going to happen, because
Yeah.
you just don't know. Like with these opinion polls, I think because he's so polarizing and has this sort of negative image in large parts of the rest of the world, a lot
Yeah.
of people may not necessarily give their true feelings about their
Yeah.
voting intentions towards him in these
Yeah.
polls. So I think there's at least a 5% swing on that one.
Sure.
Um, so I don't know, like if Obama was in the same situation, he would have had probably a bit more of a sympathy bounce for sure,
Yeah.
because I would imagine his approach up from February or January, whenever this whole thing kicked off,
Yeah.
would have been totally different, right? He would have
Yeah.
handled the pandemic differently, and
Yeah.
would have then therefore garnered a bit more sympathy from the
Yeah.
population
Yeah.
if he got it, because he would have possibly been taking more precautions, would have done a bit more to encourage a different attitude amongst the population in the US about it.
Yeah.
So because Trump has been saying and speaking the way he has been about it, and kind of been a bit flippant about
Yeah.
the pandemic, he hasn't had that sympathy bounce
Yeah.
that you may expect, the rally around the flag thing that presidents sometimes get
Yeah.
in
I
these times of
mean,
crisis.
what do you think about this idea that whether it's the different scenarios I played out, whether it was in the previous situation, if it would have been Pence who took over temporarily, or if Trump passes after winning the election, if he does win, Pence taking over, or if he dies before the election, Pence taking over. What do you think, Pence versus Biden? Do you think that's a better situation than Trump versus Biden, or a worse one? Because I have a theory that Pence is one of those guys who's quiet and behind the scenes, but he's just as, if not more dangerous than a Trump as well. Because a Pence versus Biden is just as scary for me.
Absolutely. I don't know that much about Pence, but he gives me that same feeling of
Exactly.
just this quiet dangerous dude. He's very well spoken.
Yeah,
He survived being vice president under Trump because Trump, if you've watched The Apprentice, he loves to fire people, and the way he's done things in office, he just keeps
yeah,
rotating people in and out of positions, keeping people unstable. It's kind of a
yeah,
cool way of governing, right? He just keeps people on their toes all the time. But
yeah,
in Pence, he's found like this perfect VP
yeah,
for him because he's really deferential. He hangs back. He doesn't stand out too much. Doesn't get the spotlight. That's perfect. Trump loves that. If you
yeah,
stand out too much and get the spotlight. So
yeah,
then, conversely, if Trump was out of the picture and Pence was there, I'm not sure what would happen. I don't think he's that charismatic, that dynamic.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I don't think he would inspire like the same sort of rabid MAGA supporters
yeah.
that Trump does. Like, would he get 40,000 people flocking to a Pence rally? I don't think so.
No, I mean, you're so right. I think Pence knows how to play the game, and he knows how to play Trump. Like he knows that if he just stays quiet, he'll stay in his place. But at the same time, he's got stuff boiling in his brain that we should be afraid of as well, you know. And like you hit on a point a couple minutes ago, in that like if we were to be biologists or if we were to be like explorers or whatnot, our profession and our field of study is very kind of like already established in science. 1 plus 1 we know makes two, and we know that this is like animals do this, and we know space is here. But politics is one of those fields where it's just everything that you learn is really could be thrown out the window at any point, and someone could just completely drop it on its head, and they could still become president or prime minister, as the world has shown. Because what's happening in America is very similar to what's happening in many places around the world. We only look at the States because of its position and because of kind of its global reach. But if we were to go to Asia or Russia, or I should be careful, we should blurt out Russia, or wherever we go, politics really is manipulable, or you can really mend it. Those in power can really change it to the directions they want. So it's really you just pulling your hair out, like listening to what's happening and seeing what's happening. Back in our home country in Canada, we have a better prime minister now, but for the last 10 years, we had a very conservative government, and they did a lot of silly things that made no sense to anybody, except for themselves, right? So like I've also taken a step back in that I don't get overtly attached to every political thing, and I try to limit my intake just because I go crazy from all of it. Because like you and I, Dave, I mean, like I could tell you, Dave, if you hear a racist, condone it. Like that's pretty basic information. But like, in the views of some other people, it's not as easy, and I wonder why. Like, I wonder if there's if it can be explained, if it's actual racism, if it's for personal benefit, even if you were to lie, and if you actually did believe in racism, but you could just lie and say like, it's bad too, right? But why would you not say it? Like, so all these things are just mysteries of the world, Uh,
The only
so
rules
uh,
is that there are no rules.
just throw the playbook
That's
out,
crazy.
right? But again,
Yeah.
like I was saying, if we move away from America and we look at some other places, stuff like this has been going on for decades, decades and decades. So like, it's just because I think it's so new in our part of the world, and it's so unorthodox that people are sort of like strange. And that's the thing about politics that really frustrates me, is because when we studied it, when we looked back on some of the great political leaders of our time and the revolutions and the change, it really was for the benefit of humanity. But sometimes when I look around the world, and it's not benefiting anybody except just a handful of few, clearly, And so I don't know. It's really strange, and that's why I really hope in this upcoming election that it's done fairly. People go out and vote as their right, have the right to do. So I really hope people implement their right. This second, is it the Second Amendment or Third Amendment? Second Amendment, I believe, right? The right to vote.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Listeners, if you can comment, we'll Google it after. I know oh no, the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, I believe. The Fifth Amendment is the right not to incriminate yourself, right? The first.
That's true. You clearly know a lot more about these amendments than I do, because we were talking about the knowledge of American history and politics, and I have to be honest with you, I don't know that much. All I know is from what I've read in passing and absorbed just through the sheer size and might of the American media and cultural
Yeah.
machine. But I've never formally sat down and read a book on American history.
Oh, me too. No, 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 yeah, of
So
course.
I don't know like the Pledge of Allegiance or the amendments, or
Yeah,
I barely know much about Abraham Lincoln,
yeah.
but yeah, it's. I think Trump has to be one of the most talked about presidents of all time. It's
What do you think?
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Do you think he'll be seen? This is an interesting question. This is completely on your opinion. In 50 years, if COVID doesn't destroy us, when we look back at Trump, do you think he'll be seen as one of the better presidents or one of the worst presidents overall among all 44, 45 presidents? Because it's interesting. I'll tell you. I looked online recently on a poll of currently of presidents, and he's not the last. He's actually and he's not the first either, which is strange to me because I thought he would have been near the bottom.
Wow. I
But
yeah.
again, polls have deviation, so let's just point that out, right?
Apparently, there were a couple in the 19th century which were just absolutely terrible. They were like
Yeah,
flat out corrupt. Um,
slave owners,
yeah,
yeah,
slave
yeah,
owners, like really quite not good people. I think Trump, 50 to 100 years down um, will appear just above those people. Um,
yeah.
I'm trying to
I
be
agree.
as impartial as possible and just stand back and make it just like trying to take my politics out of it. But
Yeah,
there's just been so much corruption and all the people around him getting charged, campaign managers in jail, and all that sort of stuff. Where
yeah.
I'm like, it's just there's no
It's
precedent
crazy.
for it.
It's crazy.
Um,
So I do these like learnings in my brain. Like as I live my life, I kind of have learned things and I kind of put them there. Maybe one day I'll pass them on to my children or whatnot. And one of the things I've learned, and I think there's like I don't know exactly what the phrase is for this, but when something happens to you once that you didn't expect, it hurts. And when it happens to you twice, it burns a little bit, a little less. But when it happens three times and you become adjusted to it, it really makes no difference anymore. And I've applied this in many aspects of my life. I've noticed that if I do something wrong once, I feel really guilty about it. If I do it two times, it gets less. And by the third time, I don't even feel guilty. And so like applying this to
can you
what
give
you said,
examples about what these?
so like with Trump, I mean, like when the first really big thing happened, like during the election, right? Do you remember in the 2016 election, all this stuff came out about all the bad things he'd been doing, and like, it was like shocking and horrific. But he still got elected to president. You know what I mean? And then at this point, that stuff seems like it's not on. We're not on like three things, and it's that we're on like 500 things that's out. So at this thing, I think people have just become so apathetic that it just really doesn't make a difference anymore. What you could do, Trump, like you said, he could probably just walk right in front of his building in New York and shoot someone and be like, yeah, that's okay. Like I'll still vote for him. It's
Yeah,
strange. It's really just a strange conundrum. It makes no sense.
I find it so exhausting as
Yeah,
someone who reads the news too much, to try and keep tabs on this stuff, because he reminds me of Silvio Berlusconi. He
yeah,
reminds me of Rob Ford,
yeah,
the former mayor of Toronto.
yeah,
Um, these are people who, for the longest time, it seemed like they were Teflon Dons.
yeah,
I guess is a good name for Donald Trump, where
yeah.
just nothing seemed to stick to them. They were doing quite um, unusual things.
Of course.
Berlusconi had these bunga bunga parties and allegations of corruption, and Rob Ford was into drug use and hanging out with slightly underworld characters.
Yeah,
But for the longest time, people didn't seem to mind, and
yeah,
it was about their ability to seem relatable to the people.
yeah,
But these are characters, like these three people are so good at making everyday voters and citizens think that they're just like them. But
yeah,
in reality, like Berlusconi and Trump were billionaires. Trump
yeah,
maybe not. And
yeah.
Rob Ford came from a multi-million-dollar family business. So
Family
these
business.
were like, I don't know what it is. How is it that other people can't see what we see?
Yeah.
And how do I try and change my perspective to try and understand the other side? It's really challenging for me.
It's so strange. It's politics is no longer what it was supposed to be. It's strategy. It's electorates. It's matching your demographic to who you are. Rob Ford has had the people he was voting for, plus the backing of some really big people in Ontario as well, as did Berlusconi in Italy and Trump in America. I'm sure if you ask a Trump supporter what Trump exactly has done for you in the last 4 years, the list would be very minimal. I'm sure he didn't decrease your taxes. I'm sure he didn't give you more job opportunities. I'm sure all he did was kind of speak to you on behalf of you without actually fulfilling any action. But then again, like, most of these people are not looking. I think they're just trying to have relate to their leader. You know what I mean? Have someone who kind of looks like them and speaks like them. But even then, Trump is not really of them. He came from a New York upper class real estate family. These people are more southern based or more kind of working class, and so it's strange. It's all a conundrum. It'll make your brain explode if you sit there and talk about it for too long. But I like to play this game with myself where when any leader does something completely absurd, I like to think, or like when it comes to kind of basic mannerisms and speech, if you take what they did and you did it as a child in a high school or in a kindergarten, what the reaction would be and what the punishment would be. So, for example, when Trump a couple years back when they had like the protests about some of the they're taking down the statues in the states
Yeah,
of all these
yeah.
leaders and stuff like that, and Trump didn't condone the right, the Nazis, pretty much the neo-Nazis,
You said
you
problems on
know
both sides. Yeah.
both sides. And I wonder if you took that kind of speech and you taught it to your child, and then he did something racist in school, and like the principal brought him to the office and was like, okay, justify yourself, and he's like, yeah, I know I did what's bad, but like blah 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 blah, or so and so and so, he would get punished and expelled or suspended or be brought home. Like the same scenarios but at different levels would have different pretty much outcomes that you would expect. But when it happens at the highest court in the world or the highest level in the world, really it's just like nothing, because Trump really doesn't report to anybody. You know what I mean? No one is putting him in bounds. He's supposed to report to the citizens of his state, right? But really, he just does and says things, and it just gets away with it that nobody in any other context would. If you were to be racist in the office, or if you were to just be a complete idiot not on an issue, not be prepared for a presentation or whatnot, you would be punished for that. But Trump continues to progress, and it just really, this game I play with myself, it makes no sense, right? And we don't raise our children that way. We teach our children to be diplomatic. We teach them to have the manners and to be polite. And really, he has just shown the complete opposite of what's happened, right?
Yeah, it's very troubling. And you, like, when you're raising children, I mean, we don't have children, but like when you imagine raising a child and they're looking up to a president, they're someone that, should be above
Role model.
everything
Yeah.
and a role model. And, a parent will tell their child, when you grow up, if you want to be president someday, you should
Yeah.
behave such and such a way. Then they
Yeah.
see this behavior and
And
it's not even close to being that.
I
Um,
wonder. Yeah.
I think what's really good about the Westminster parliamentary system is it gives like some accountability for the very top leader, because
Yeah.
Boris Johnson, Justin Trudeau, all these people in their parliaments, they have to stand in front of opposition figures and answer questions on a near
Yes,
daily basis,
I agree.
not just from the media. But I think it's really good in these systems that. Um, if they're really just talking nonsense all the time, that there's a chance to really hear the other
Yeah.
side and for them to have their chance to rebut it. Because in the US, if you have a case like Trump, he'll just start shouting at the media and saying, you're fake news, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. Whereas, obviously you can have a back and forth and it gets pretty ugly in parliament, but there's still that
Yeah.
opportunity, this other forum
Yeah.
for them to be held accountable. And I think, the U.S. system has its faults, but it's still relatively stable, and you hope that it would continue that way going forward. But I just think that what you see in Canada and in the UK adds a little extra layer of accountability.
Yeah. I agree. It's an interesting system. I'll end with asking you a final question. And again, this is completely opinion based, and you can say I don't know or I don't want to answer. Do you think a Joe Biden presidency, if that
Mm-hmm.
were to happen in any scenario, do you think that would be positive in the sense that it would be able to reverse the damage of the last 4 years? Do you think that will completely change a new leaf, or do you think it's good, but it's not as good as we need it to be?
Um, yeah, I think he's 79 years old. He's kind of centrist, very neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned in terms of where he stands on policy. He's just like a
Yeah.
standard bearer for the Democratic Party. But I think he'll be like a good candidate or presidential figure to kind of gradually move away from like the Trump years and just moderate things a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, what is not good is if it becomes something that like veers from left to right in a very
Completely.
erratic way. Because what I don't like again with this system is the U.S. System has become so polarized that
Yeah.
Trump came in and basically his entire mission is just to eradicate the Obama legacy. Like he didn't seem
Yeah.
to have his own mindset except for just do the opposite of what Obama would do or just
Yeah.
erase his legacy.
Yeah.
And you just hope that someone would, if they were the next Republican after whoever the
Yeah.
Democrat is a bit more gradualist in what they do. I mean, I'm totally okay with there being a right-wing person, but don't come and
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
burn the house down and then start over again. So yeah, I think Biden should come in there and don't want to alienate the Trump people. That's
Yeah.
not great,
Yeah.
but just try and be a normal person. Just
Yeah.
try and behave normally.
I think you ended it on the right fact, is that I have no problem with people with conflicting political views with me. I think that's fine. I mean, that's normal. I mean, I don't agree with you, but we can be two people who respect one another. I think at this point we just need a normal person, as you've said, someone who is qualified, who is dignified, and who is respectful, and someone who just understands the role of the presidency as opposed to the role of the individual. And so whether it's Joe Biden or whatever it happens, American politics has become so divisive that I think it's strayed so far from what it was intended to be, that now it's just a party politic thing. It's, if you're a Republican, Dave, and I'm a Democrat, we can't be friends. We have to be at odds. But I'm sure we have similar views on a majority of things. But let's see. It's 4 weeks away. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll talk about it, and we probably will do an post-election show, and see our views on it. But
Oh, for sure.
I just thought this was an interesting issue because it's never happened, and we'll see what ends up becoming the outcome of this.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Tosh. It was very interesting to hear about peculiarities of the American system.
There you go. All right, so we've covered. We've been traveling around the world. We've been back to North America, and then maybe next week we'll set sail again. We'll travel somewhere else, somewhere we haven't been.
Armchair travels.
There you go. All right, Dave. Have a good night.
You too. Take care, Tosh.
Bye-bye.